Vanakkam and Namaste, dear friends. Welcome to another episode of Avarna Commentary. Today, we are looking into a deeply polarizing intellectual battleground that has been playing out in the academic citadels of Indian higher education. On June 23, 2026, the Hindu newspaper published an op-ed and it created storms in the academic teacups. Written by Vasudevan Mugund, it carried the provocative title A Trojan Horse Has Breached the IITs. Mugund sounded an urgent alarm, arguing that India's premier technical institutions are experiencing a dangerous encroachment of theological dogma and pseudoscience weaponized under the banner of the Indian Knowledge System or IKS. Mugund is not completely wrong to demand rigor. He acknowledges that studying India's genuine historical milestones in mathematics, linguistics, and metallurgy is academically valid. But he charges that the current, according to him, top down institutionalization of IKS forces unscientific concepts like astrology and reincarnation into elite spaces, risking the alienation of Indian scholars from global rationalist standards. It's a fierce critique. But if we strip away the exaggerations, does his argument hold water? If we strip away the sensationalism, does his argument hold water? Or does it rely on a rigid binary view that misses the essence of IKS? Perhaps on purpose. Let us break down the facts, fact check the claims, and look at the real risks and radical promises of this educational experiment called Indian knowledge system. Mugund writes with a lot of passion, pointing fingers directly at IKS hubs established at IIT Kharagpur, IIT Gandhinagar, IIT Bombay, and IIT Kanpur. He singles out Kanpur and IIT Mandi as leaders in researching, within quotes, consciousness, reincarnation, and what he labels Vedic biology, putting those terms in heavy quotation to imply an institutional curriculum of regressive dogma. But if you audit the public curricula of IIT Mandi and IIT Kanpur and other hubs, the term Vedic biology literally does not exist. No such course or named project is on the books, at least as far as I know. Manufacturing a sensationalist label like that creates a convenient strawman rather than providing objective criticism. He is using an invented title. Then there is the consciousness misstep. This whole clubbing of the study of consciousness with or as pseudoscience is a massive academic misstep. The nature of consciousness is not a fringe theological obsession. It is one of the most vibrant, unresolved frontiers in modern neuroscience. Cognitive science and philosophy worldwide, they study nature of consciousness. It has implications in AI also. Investigating traditional Indian philosophical frameworks of the mind and integrating them into the exploratory approaches alongside contemporary cognitive models is a perfectly robust academic exercise, provided it adheres to peer-reviewed scientific protocols. So what is actually happening on the ground at IIT Mandi? They have introduced a mandatory course for all first-year BTech undergraduate students, and it is titled Introduction to Consciousness and Well-Being under their Indian Knowledge System and Mental Health Application Center. IKS-MHA. The curriculum blends ancient Indian wisdom with modern scientific research for mental health. The course features units exploring the gut-mind connection, the sleep circadian rhythms, and diet and meditation, and then they seamlessly try to blend modern biology and anatomy from both Western medicine and Ayurvedic frameworks. It also integrates traditional theories of consciousness, the subtle body, Sushma Sarira, and the psychological effects of performing arts like music and dance. One explicit unit covers embryogenesis alongside the concept of Sukshma Sarira or subtle body. In modern biology, embryogenesis is an empirically mapped, strictly biophysical process governed by genetics, cellular signaling, and morphology. If this curriculum presents the Sushma Sarira, a metaphysical entity composed of, in Indian tradition, mind, intellect, and ego, as a literal causal agent driving biological embryogenesis, then that dangerously slides into pseudoscience. The lesson here is simple. If a course bundles untestable metaphysical doctrines into the curriculum as empirical biology, then it creates a false equivalence and it is not good. At the same time, framing IKS as a rich repository of diverse epistemological frameworks, allowing a student to approach a problem from completely different frameworks, different windows, is very much needed. Care needs to be taken that the universities foster genuine intellectual epistemological pluralism without compromising scientific rigor. We must aggressively defend empirical verifiability, no doubt about it. And we need critics who target actual curricular failures and lapses. But attacking through invented sensationalist stereotype titles is not the way to do that. The second fallacy is that the op-ed takes an intellectual shortcut by dismantling the University of Virginia's division of Perceptual Studies, DOPS, claiming that any partnership with them exists merely for Western credibility. But this dismissive attitude ignores a legacy of serious cross-disciplinary inquiry. The legacy of Ian Stevenson, Dr. Ian Stevenson, the founder of DOPS, spent decades pioneering rigorous systematic methods to investigate anomalous memories. His empirical discipline was so robust that even Carl Sagan, even while he rejected the concept of reincarnation as explanation, he found the data deserved a serious study despite the fact that he even had doubts about the data. So I have shown the entire complete quotation of Dr. Carl Sagan, late Carl Sagan, so that you will not be misled to think that Carl Sagan actually supported or believed in reincarnation. He did not. So that is actually the attitude that we also should take. This is a research. What I believe or what I don't believe doesn't matter. Then the next fallacy is the cohort of one. Mukundan claims that researchers are building a universal claim based on, within quotes, 1 6-year-old in North India and a cohort size of 1. While a specific IIT Mandi session may have highlighted a single recent case study to illustrate a proposed protocol, the actual research body of DOPS is fundamentally built on large-scale statistical aggregates. Founded in 1967, DOPS has meticulously recorded and documented over 2,500 distinct cases of children claiming past-life experiences, memories worldwide, categorizing them based on the quality and verifiability of information provided. The op-ed claims that the researchers create stimuli by developing familiarity with the child and collecting photos before the test. This completely misconstrues standard experimental controls. In controlled visual recognition tests using EEG or skin conductance, researchers gathered target photos from alleged previous family alongside control photos of similar people or places unknown to the child both. The child is not shown the photos beforehand. The children are exposed to them for the first time during the neural recording to see if there is a distinct recognition response to target stimuli versus control stimuli. So to the baseline criticism that families have ample time to meet and line up their stories before a case is recorded. The DOPS protocols have long established rigorous forensic safeguards. In fact, in the current digital connectivity age, these protocols have become more strict. Up to this point, what we are seeing are all methodological objections to a particular study. This is not in the curriculum, to a particular study that they are planning. But these are methodological objections, objections to the perceived deficiency of scientific rigor in the methodology. At least here you have a reason to point these things out, even though they are not there. Those deficiencies are not there, but you can always sound the alarm so that people can be extra cautious. However, the final dead giveaway of an intrinsic prejudice in Mugun's piece is a profound philosophical misunderstanding of empirical science itself. He characterizes using a physicalist entity like an EEG to test what he calls a dualist theory, which in this case is reincarnation, as fundamentally flawed and calls it silly. But epistemologically, an investigator does not need to believe any metaphysical, any dualist entity. He is not measuring a soul or jiva. An EEG measures an electrical activity in the brain, period. If a child claims to remember a specific person's life, testing whether their brain displays automated, subconscious familiarity responses when shown a photo of that person's house, which the child previously does not know, is a perfectly valid physicalist test of a cognitive claim. It can actually falsify the entire claim. That is the way you falsify a claim. It tests memory retention and recognition of anomalies and not the metaphysical entity called the jiva or a metaphysical process called reincarnation. Reincarnation is only an explanation, one of the many explanations. That's all. This anomalous phenomenon exists, and whether it is genuine or not, that is what the EEG actually finds out. Now we come to another very crucial aspect. While we Indian academics are logged in ideological trench warfare, either wholesale rejecting consciousness studies as backward pseudoscience, or even over enthusiastically embracing unverified claims without empirical rigor, the West is already stealing a march over India in the very research domains where India should and could have been the natural leader. Look at the global academic landscape. The scientific investigation of extraordinary human states, altered human states, specifically near-death experiences, NDEs, out-of-body experiences, OBEs, liminal consciousness. So these studies have fully transitioned from speculative metaphysics to a rigorous domain of study within cognitive neuroscience and psychiatry. And where is this happening? At prominent Western medical and scientific institutions. While Indian critics scoff at Dobbs, researchers have been spending decades documenting over 1,000 NDE cases using rigorous psychometrics like the Grayson NDE scale, proving these experiences trigger permanent measurable psychological transformation. In Europe, the Giga Consciousness Research Group and the Coma Science Group at the University of Lille, Belgium, under Dr. Stephen Lores and Dr. Charlotte Marshall, are mapping the neurodynamic signatures of altered states using high-density electroencephalography, functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and also clinical hypnosis. They are mapping how the brain retrieves complex episodic memories of liminal states. And they are seeing whether they can be used for therapeutic purposes, whether they can be used to understand certain hidden aspects of consciousness. Look at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Center of Healthy Minds, directed by neuroscientist Dr. Richard Davidson. Since 2013, they have been running a project called Tuktam Project. TUKDAM project. They are flying teams into India to deploy sparse electrode EEG configurations, forensic anthropological tracking via Munsell color cards, and microbiomic assays to study the post-mortem meditative state of Tibetan Buddhist practitioners dying in meditative equipoise. Western cognitive neuroscience has successfully mapped the temporoparietal junction as the brain's multisensory integration hub responsible for constructing our physical sense of embodiment. Destruction of this temporoparietal junction, TPJ, generates disembodied self-location. Western researchers use virtual reality goggles and synchronous tactile stimulation to induce brief fragmented somatic illusions of being outside the body. Yet, what they find is that these laboratory illusions induced experiences completely lack the crystalline clarity, hyper-lucidity, and veridical perception, the transformative capacity reported during spontaneous OBEs and near-death experiences during cardiac arrest when the brain is clinically non-functional with a flat EEG. Under conditions of anoxia, standard neurobiology dictates chaotic delirium and cognitive fragmentation. Yet, prospective clinical protocols like the Dutch Lancet study by Dr. Pim van Lommel and the AWARE study by Dr. Sam Pernia, they show highly structured, lucid and cognitive experiences at the edge of death. How do we understand this? In bridging this explanatory gap, neurophenomenology can be aided by Indic epistemologies or broader Eastern epistemologies. For example, the Sankhya Yoga model of Antharkarana, the Advaita Vedanta framework of Chit, witnessing consciousness operating through structural layers of the koshas. The Buddhist Abhidharma and Yogacara system that map the mind through Pradida Samudbhava, the dependent origination, and the description of the Alaya Vijnana as a non-local reservoir of consciousness. These traditions treat the physical brain not as the producer of consciousness. Consciousness is not an emergent property, but rather as a physical receiver of filter that gates, channels, and projects consciousness. In the West, there are platforms and academic spaces for such a dialogue. Still, you can be a complete materialist. You can think that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon. Still, you can use these frameworks to study the consciousness, gain more insights, look into dimensions where you have not seen before. What we are doing in India? Sad. We have a few phenomenal exceptions. The Center for Consciousness Studies has NIMHANS in Bangalore for one. They are studying research integrating psychiatric, allopathic and yogic sciences. And you can count these institutions on your fingers. Even these Indian initiatives are constantly under fire from a narrow domestic ideological rejection rooted in old Marxist prejudices that reflexively label anything connected to traditional Indian philosophy as retrograde, backward, or theological or pseudoscience. Conversely, there is also a risk of an over-enthusiastic embrace of unscientific pseudoscience in the opposite side, which may demand bias towards metaphysical worldviews without rigorous peer-reviewed protocols. However, by choking consciousness studies in a crossfire of ideological dogma, India may voluntarily be abandoning its position as the natural civilizational leader of this global paradigm shift. None of this, however, means that the institutionalization of IKS in technical institution is free of risks. Legitimate concerns remain, particularly around curriculum design, institutional partnership, and the criteria used to evaluate non-formal knowledge. In navigating the evolving landscape of IKS within higher education, some developments merit thoughtful attention and careful stewardship. One such development is the 2025 Memorandum of Understanding between IIT Mandi and Bhaktivedanta Research Center, an institution closely associated with ISKCON. While one admires the enormous good social work that ISKCON has done, particularly in removing malnutrition in students, children, and their devotion to Krishna, whom they call the Supreme Personality of Godhead, these are unquestionable. We bow before that. But it is also true that there are certain core groups within the broader movement who have at times advanced positions on evolution, history, and archaeology, which can only be considered as pseudoscience, pseudo-archaeology, pseudo-history. Although the MOU itself focuses particularly on Sanskrit texts, traditional commentaries, manuscript digitalization, and related contribution to curriculum and research enhancement, academic institutions may wish to maintain the usual layers of peer review and interdisciplinary scrutiny whenever the perspectives that touch upon contested scientific questions enter technical or scientific programs. Care should be taken to distance the IITs from the pseudo-history or the pseudoscience and pseudo-archaeology that certain sections in ISKCON promote. There is also another important dimension worth considering with the constructive care. In my 2024 article dealing with the criticisms made against IKS in the famous Science magazine, and it was dated September 2024, I wrote, let me quote, IKS also has the ability to democratize traditional knowledge, which is often encapsulated into hereditary occupational communities called jatis. On 12th October 2024, IKS announced a scheme called Vidwan. One can only imagine the transformative potential unleashed by effectively linking the IKS Vidwan initiative with the Prime Minister Modi's Viswakarma scheme. This synergy can create powerful conduit, channeling the invaluable knowledge of traditional artisans into the halls of academia. Picture a vibrant exchange where the wisdom of carpenters, sculptors, potters, and countless other artisans enriches students' learning while academics gain a deeper appreciation for the embodied knowledge embedded within these time-honored crafts. This I wrote in 2024. In July 2025, IKS launched a Sedu Bandha Scholar Scheme. The scheme aimed to value and integrate diverse forms of learning, and these learnings are gained beyond formal institutional framework through experience and traditional forms of learning. Towards this end, it offered two pathways. One is an expert panel assessing the learners to have knowledge equivalent to a completed bachelor's degree and get them in PG courses with a month's scholarship up to Rs 45,700, while those deemed by the expert panel to have knowledge equivalent to a complete master's degree can pursue PhD with a monthly scholarship up to 75,000. This scheme operates jointly with Center Sanskrit University. Of the 18 domains, many draw deeply from classical Sanskrit traditions, such as Vedic philosophical and cognitive sciences, language, speech and linguistics, law and order, science of governance, and Vedas, auxiliary texts of Vedas and philosophies, while there are others including historical and civilizational sciences and political, economic and strategic sciences encompass broader and sometimes more open-ended terrain. Subjects like mechanical, digital design and engineering raise interesting practical questions of how experiential learning occurred through a traditional guru-shishya relationship might be meaningfully assessed alongside contemporary engineering and digital competencies. Ensuring that such knowledge systems find equitable recognition within the broader IKS framework would actually strengthen the very spirit of democratization these schemes seek to advance. The promise of these programs lies in their capacity to build genuine bridges between classical learning and modern disciplines, between hereditary craft traditions and contemporary academia, and between diverse communities and national educational institutions. Ultimately, it is about knowledge shackled inside traditional fiefdom. Bring them to rigorous study and democratize them, and through this process benefit the society. But the danger is that This may further fortify the encapsulation of knowledge domains within jatis and even give them a kind of shine that they have been validated by IITs. That is the danger. The purpose should be very clear. It is not to encapsulate these knowledge domains, particularly the Vedic or the scheduled communities or scheduled tribes knowledge domains within those jatis, but to democratize them so that others can enter into these domains and learn with the same affirmative action principles that are given to other educational institutions. That should be the final goal. So realizing this promise will be helped by a clear, transparent criteria for equivalence, by expert panels that consciously reflect India's full spectrum of knowledge traditions, and by consistent commitment to rigorous evidence-based standards alongside cultural respect. When these elements are held together with care and humility, the IKS endeavor can become not only a celebration of heritage but also a living contribution to a more inclusive and intellectually vibrant future for Indian higher education and benefit the entire planet at large.
Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Jai Hind, Jai Bhim.